Welcome to the program. We are joined today by Dr. Mehmood Hussain. He is the head of the Department of International Relations at the University of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. He's a seasoned academic, having spent much of his time researching the impact of China's relations with Pakistan, as well as the conflict in Kashmir. Today's episode focuses on that conflict and the international community's actions and inactions in attempting to resolve and finding a long-term peaceful solution to the territorial dispute between India and Pakistan. We cover these conflict zones on this podcast with a couple of things in mind. You've heard me talk about this if you listened to the episode where we covered the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the perspectives that were shared in that episode, also by an expert researcher who has lived in and looked at the region for most of their time and career. We are doing something similar in this episode, but there's a few things that we do as we approach this. Number one, I always acknowledge at the beginning of these kinds of programs that an ongoing conflict has more than one side to the story, and it's nearly impossible to find any truly objective observer that doesn't have a bit of a bias in one direction or another. And so we do the best we can to find people who can speak to the facts, provable facts of the situation, who can give us a perspective that is relatively fair, at least representative of one of the two sides of the dispute, and at the minimum can give us a fairly accurate picture of how we got to where we are in the conflict, regardless of what you believe about who was right, who was wrong, and what has happened along the way. So understanding and being humble enough to know that a truly objective observer is nearly impossible to find, we try to present to you points of view that you may not have already heard. And so it might be a little bit of an overassumption on my part, but the fact is that in many English-speaking countries, we have not seen this conflict covered much in recent years, and when and where we have seen the conflict covered at all, it has been primarily from a perspective of a Western perspective, first of all, outside looking in, and when there has been some conversation in the region, it's largely been from the Indian government's perspective, or the Indian population, or the Indian people, or the Indian military. So what we try to do in this episode is being respectful that is a legitimate point of view, and it's largely been shared in many mainstream media outlets. We thought it was important to get a perspective from people who have lived and worked in the region and may have more of a sympathetic ear towards the Pakistani position and towards the Muslim population that lives in this region. And so we felt Dr. Hussain was about as good as anybody you can find to give a fair and balanced history of the conflict from an academic and research-based point of view, but also fairly represent the view of Muslims and Pakistanis in the region and throughout the world, quite frankly, who may look at the conflict differently than how it's largely been reported. So as we present this conversation to you, I do so understanding that there are going to be those who listen to the conversation we have and violently disagree with some of the conclusions or some of the observations, and I expect that. And I simply ask everybody to listen with an open mind and an open heart, as we always try to do on this program. Know that we will seek guests who can speak about this conflict from the other perspective, from India's perspective, and that there are many, many resources available that can share that perspective. We are not here to tell you what to think. We're not here to tell you that there is a definitive right or wrong. We are here to offer conversation and to expand global awareness of important issues that might not otherwise be heard, and to share perspectives for your consideration and your consideration alone. And so it is with that humbling beginning and introduction that I want to present this conversation. And again, I ask you all to keep an open mind, an open heart. I think you will learn something. I think this interview was important for me to better understand some of the history of the conflict, especially for those of us who have not seen this in our daily headlines on a regular basis. It was important to get a refresher as to how this conflict got to where it is. And then there are obviously some perspectives and observations. And it's not my job as a podcast interviewer to fact check or to challenge. It's my job to facilitate a conversation so that a a researcher's perspective can be shared for your consideration. And so that's what this conversation is. And I hope that you get something out of it. And so, without any further qualifications or delays, I present to you my conversation with Dr. Mehmood Hussain. Dr. Hussain, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Brian.
So let's begin with a little bit of brief history on Kashmir, on the region that you study. People certainly know what's in their history books, but give us a brief history of the region and how we got to where we are today.
Okay, let's start the Kashmir history from 1947, and we will also discuss to some extent the background before the 1947. Actually, we are going to start it from 1856, when basically Kashmir was sold by the Britain to the Maharaja Gulab Singh. He was actually the ruler of Kashmir, and his next generation, they were ruling the Kashmir till 1947. But the problem of Kashmir conflict was started in 1947, when the Britain, they decided that they have to leave subcontinent, and then they have to give independence to India and Pakistan. So India and Pakistan, they both got independence in August 1947, but their legal framework was finalized in June 1947, which is called June 3rd Plan. This is actually an independence plan, and according to this document, Britain's and the leadership of National Congress and Pakistan Muslim League, they actually decided and they agreed that the princely states, which were actually under the paramountcy of the Britons, that they will decide their future considering their religious, linguistic, uh, cultural, and economic linkages between the emerging India, as well as the new dominion of Pakistan. So, according to this document, uh, Kashmir was a natural part of Pakistan, because Kashmir at that time has the Muslim majority in the dominance, as well as Kashmir has cultural and linguistics as well as religious linkages with the new state of Pakistan. Most important thing which needs to consider today, that Kashmir has direct land access to the areas which were at that time became part of Pakistan. Like Kashmir had a road link through the KPK, which is now KPK. Earlier at that time, it was Frontier Province, as well as it also has linkages to what we call the Punjab province of Pakistan. So, according to this understanding, Kashmir has to become the part of Pakistan. But what actually happened, that at that time, the Maharaja Hari Singh, who was the ruler of Kashmir and he was an Hindu, he decided that he has to. Actually, he was thinking that he has to remain an independent ruler of Kashmir, but India and its leadership, they were actually persuading him to decide. At the another thing which was happening in his state, uh, that was a rebellion, or you can call it the local movement for liberation. This local movement was started in 1931, even before the liberation or independence of India and Pakistan, when the people of Poonch sector, or you can call it the Poonch division, they actually revolted against the oppressive regime of this Maharaja Hari Singh, and they started demanding their independence and their legal and inherent rights, right to self-determination, as well as right to free speech, right to dignified uh, uh, jobs and other things. So this actually further complicated the matters for Maharaja, when those peoples were struggling to get the independence, as well as they also asked for help from the northwestern frontier province peoples who are dominating actually the Pathans. those peoples, they came for help to help these Kashmiris, and through this the first Indo-Pakistan war started. And ultimately, considering the tragic situation in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh acceded the territory with India on 27th October 1947. And due to this conflict, Pakistan liberated one third part of the Kashmir state, and the two-third went to under the control of India, which is now called the Jammu and Kashmir. On the other side, liberated part of Pakistan is now called the Azad Jammu and Kashmir. And now, still since 1947, both these states, India and Pakistan, they are fighting over this disputed territory. They fought the first war in 1947-48, and the second war was started in 1965. The third war, which Pakistan and India they experienced, it started in 1971, and this dispute pushed these two South Asian states to get the nuclear weapons, and consequently in 1998 India and Pakistan they attained the nuclear capability. And again, after getting this nuclear power, they again engaged in a limited conflict over Kargil, which is a part of this disputed land. And we also experienced the high tension in 2001, 2, and 2007 and 2008. And this is the brief history that this conflict, this dispute, actually dragging these two neighbors and these two rivals, and they are fighting with each other to actually integrate this entire region in either state.
Now, in more recent times, we know that the region's been in the headlines with India taking some aggressive actions there. Can you give our listeners a sense of what the most recent events that are shaping the region are?
Yeah. So actually, this region got a twist in August 2019. On 5th August 2019, the Narendra Modi regime in India, they actually invoked the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, which is granted under Article 370 and 35A. These two articles are very special in the Indian Constitution. The first one, Article 370, under this article, the state of Kashmir, it actually has the domestic autonomy except foreign affairs, military, communications, and currency. These four ministries are directly controlled, or affairs are directly controlled by the Indian government. But on other matters, the domestic matters, those are actually maintained or they carried out by the Kashmiri. You can call it the Kashmiri Parliament. And the 35A, this article actually preserved the identity of Kashmir. This article was actually introduced during the Maharaja rule back in 19th century. And according to this rule, that no outsider is allowed to get land in Jammu and Kashmir, and no outsider can get a state subject. You can call like a citizenship of this state. So, but what Narendra Modi did, he actually reversed these two special privileges, and after that he introduced various legislation. Like he first of all he introduced the new domicile law. So first of all he did that, he introduced the Reorganization Act. According to Reorganization Act, Jammu and Kashmir is divided what now is called the Ladakh region, as well as Jammu and Valley region. So Ladakh is directly placed under the central government of India, and Jammu and Valley they have their own setup of the government. So, and another thing which is most alarming, that is the domicile law. According to new domicile law, any person who has lived in Kashmir for 10 years, or who has passed the matriculation exam in Jammu and Kashmir, he is eligible to get a domicile certificate of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And To date, after it is now almost 6 years, and India has issued more than 4 million new domiciles to the Hindu majority peoples. So actually, what we understand, or we are actually concerned about this policy of Narendra Modi, that India is trying to alter the demographic graphy of Kashmir, because Kashmir in 1947, Kashmir was a predominantly Muslim state, and this was the reason that it has to join Pakistan. But now, what Modi is doing, Modi is actually altering uh, uh, this demographic balance, and he actually now he's actually giving more domicile to Hindus, so that in the future, maybe when a UN when India called the UN to arrange a plebiscite, and at that time maybe India has a more favorable outcome, because of this Hindu majority region. So another thing, Modi has also introduced the new uh, industrial policy, and through this policy again they are giving certificates and land leases to the Indian conglomerates, and they are setting up their businesses in this contested region.
So these are pretty aggressive policies. What, in your mind, enabled Modi to take these actions over the last 5 years when surely Indian governments of the past would have considered it?
You know what? Narendra Modi is a member of RSS. This is the most extremist Hindu party in the history of India. And this RSS, since its inception in early 90s, they were actually leveling the ground that they have to revoke this special status of Jammu and Kashmir. What is actually important are the uh, uh, distinction between this BJP government and the National Congress government, that this time Narendra Modi got the overwhelming majority in the Indian Parliament, and this actually gave him the strength and the willingness to revoke this special status of Jammu and Kashmir. Another thing which is most important, and which is actually distinguish this Narendra Modi and the past leadership, that Modi is most ultra nationalist Hindu. But earlier leadership of National Congress as well as this BJP government, they were not ultra Hindu nationalists. They were progressives. They were actually putting together these Hindus and Muslims, and they were trying to build a harmonious society in India.
There are a lot of misconceptions about this region and about this conflict. I think you've helped us understand the history and the more recent past. When it comes to international media or maybe academics, what are the things that you're routinely having to correct people like me or others about our understanding or misunderstanding of this conflict and some of the historical facts?
I think when we are listening to the international commentators or the academics, they are mostly talking that this part of the Kashmir is a territory of India. This needs to be corrected, because this is not a natural part of India. Even it was not a natural part of Pakistan, but it has to be decided according to the UN resolutions which were passed in 1947 and 48. So we have peoples in the Europe and even in the US, they are considering that India is not doing any kind of human rights violations in this region, and the peoples, they are living in a peaceful environment, they have multiple privileges. But what actually is happening in the this occupied region, that it's totally opposite. India has deployed more around 1 million army in this region to control the people of Kashmir, as well as it has introduced various draconian laws. And through these laws, peoples are actually restricted to speak about the brutalities which are committed by the Indian government and the Indian army, as well as the police in this region. When we talk about the human rights violation, for your knowledge and for our audience, more than Around 100,000 peoples have been killed in this region since 1980s. It's a huge number. When we talk about such kind of brutalities, it's a huge number. This is actually a genocide. This is actually a ethnic cleansing. India is carrying forward this agenda, and now it is actually more focusing on the slow genocide of Muslims in this region. Another thing which is more alarming, India is also using women as a shield. Indian military and Indian paramilitary forces, they are involved in this mass rapes of women. There are the more there is a prominent case in this region that was committed in the late 1990s, that is the Kunan Pushpura. At that time, many women were raped by the Indian soldiers in one night. And you know, the minor female was just 9 years old. That girl was raped by the Indian military, and the most older one was 56 years old. So you can understand, or you can imagine, that how India is carrying out his agenda of colonization in this region. The now, after 2019, what India is doing, India is slowly and gradually is actually implementing its neo-colonial agenda. It is killing people. It is actually putting them in bars. It is also snatching their land and other things. So this is the mentality that India wants to fully integrate uh, this region with the Indian state. But this actually, India is actually trying to integrate the territory of the region, the land of the region, not the people of region. Peoples are discriminated. Peoples are persuaded or pushed or punished, and they are exterminated from this land. But India wants the land of Kashmir region. So the Americans and the Europeans, they have to understand that India is not actually a democratic state. India is not giving rights to self determination to the people of Kashmir. Actually, it is carrying forward its agenda of colonization in this region. And peoples in Europe and in America, they have to speak up. They have to speak up for the people of Kashmir.
Why do you think that has not happened? Why do you think the international community has largely stayed out of talking about, let alone trying to resolve much of what you just described?
Yeah, okay. This is very pressing and interesting question. Uh, from the perspective of international relations, it's more important to understand the international politics, and especially when we understand the international politics from the realist school of thought, it actually gives us the correct information. Now here are two cases. One is Kashmir and another one is Gaza. What is happening in Gaza in the last 1 year? What happened? More than 40,000 people, including most of the people are children and women, they have been killed in Gaza. But what international community is doing, what the US, the European, the German, and French, and even UK, they are doing, they are giving money, they are giving weapons to Israel. Why? Because Israel is a client state in this Middle Eastern region. US wants to maintain and to secure its hegemonic state on international level, as well as it wants to contain the rising influence of China and Russia, as well as Iran in the Middle East region. Similarly, when we talk about the Kashmir conflict, this realist school of thought explains that states are self interested. They only think about their own national interest, and they actually safeguard their interests, and they never bother to think about the human rights and the upholding of human rights or the such kind of violation. India, in this scenario, we understand that India is a rising economy. India is, I think, the fourth largest economy in the world after China. And since 2002, US is considering India from the perspective of to counter China. and US has developed a very close and very robust relationship with India. It signed a nuclear deal in 2006, as well as it signed a 10 years defense pact in 2006, which was renewed in 2016. And the US has transferred more than 15 billions of weapons and ammunitions and new planes to India. So the US is thinking that it will use India to counter China in the larger Asia Pacific region. And this was the reason that during the Trump administration, they gave a special status to India, that now in this Indo-Pacific region, India will provide the net security to this region. And this perspective, the realist perspective, actually telling us that no state in the world is thinking about the human rights violations or the democratic norms and of values. They are only thinking that how they can secure their national interests. So in this scenario, from the international perspective, India is more important because it is economically stronger, militarily it is stronger, it has more diplomatic clout in international community. Their voice is listening in the US, in the Europeans, and as well as in other parts of the world. But on the other side, Pakistan, which is also a party to this dispute, Pakistan in this current scenario is not most important or most prominent. There are two factors most important. The first thing, it lost its relevance in international politics due to the withdrawal of US from Afghanistan. The first thing, is not focusing on the South Asia. Now US is more focused on the Indo-Pacific region, and now in the Middle Eastern region. So Pakistan is not important, it is not protecting the national interests of the US. So this is the reason that the US is not supporting the Pakistani perspective. Another thing, domestically, Pakistan is engulfed in various issues. It is consistently facing political instability since 2022. Another thing, that it is economically weak. It is largely it is dependent on the multilateral institutions for the economic bailout, as well as it is dependent on China, on the Middle Eastern states. So this is the reason that Pakistan is not projecting its uh, just case in front of international community, which is actually missing the opportunity that how India is doing its own part, that they are more projecting their diplomacy is more stronger and more effective. They are telling the international community that Kashmir is our part, and we are it has no issue in this region. There is a peace, people are living a happy life. So from the international perspective, what I said, that this realist school of thought is clearly explaining that why nation states are not putting pressure on India just because of their national interests.
So, one area of research that you've explored is China's role in the region and their interactions with and relations with Pakistan and others. Can you give us a sense of the role that the People's Republic of China plays?
China is sharing borders with India and Pakistan. In initial years after 1949, when China got the independence from the Western colonialism, they tried to build a harmonious relationship with India. And in initial years, what India and China, they were calling the relation that Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, means Hindis, India and China are brothers. But what happened in 1962? They fought the first war, and due to this first war, China and Pakistan, they came closer. They resolved the territorial dispute, and after that, China consistently is providing support to Pakistan. From 1962 to 1980s, China was clearly supporting Pakistani position that Kashmir is a disputed region, and it has to be resolved as per the UN resolutions. But what happened in 1980s? In 1980s, again, they India and China, they resumed their relationship. They started rapprochement, and the Rahul Gandhi, the Indian Prime Minister at that time, he visited China, and they started trade and other matters. And after that, China changed its position from the perspective of Pakistan. This and they started touting that Pakistan and India, they has to resolve this dispute bilaterally. So it was a clear tilt in Chinese perspective. But again, it changed in 2000 and after 2013, when China announced its the most ambitious Belt and Road Initiative. And after that, China started developing China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It is the central part of this BRI, and through this project, China is investing around 62 billion in this in Pakistan, and it some portion of this investment has already been invested in this the Azad Kashmir and the Gilgit Baltistan. And due to this, now China is conceding that it has to support Pakistani perspective. Another thing, that when after understanding that the India has developed a close relationship with the US, so now China needs a close and sustained relationship with Pakistan. So this is now again that China is playing crucial role. It is economically supporting Pakistan, diplomatically it is protecting Pakistan on international various international forum. Either it is FATF, or the United Nations Security Council, and even other institutions, as well as it is providing political support to Pakistan.
Do you think that the presence of the Chinese government and the policies that both Pakistan and China are looking to pursue can be a path towards resolution? Because it feels like very few other large nations in the world are looking for any sort of compromise that would be fair or beneficial to the Pakistani side and their perspective.
In near future, it seems that it will be difficult. That what Pakistan and China wants, that they will succeed in their intentions. But if there comes a clear transition in international system, and China becomes a global power, it replaces the US, then there might be a chance that Pakistan and China gets what they want. But in near future, by 2050 or by 2060, it is quite difficult that China will be able to replace the US, even in the Indo-Pacific region. If they can do this, then they will be able to replace the United States on the international level. But on the other side, what is actually problematic, that is that the US and Chinese the values or this political systems are quite different. What now US is projecting, that China's Chinese communism actually is a threat to the free world, to the democratic world. So this is the reason that the Europeans and the European and other democracies, large democracy like the India, the even Indonesia and other some states in Africa, they are supporting the this US perspective, and they consider China as a threat. So, according to my assessment, it will be quite difficult for Pakistan and China to persuade India that it should come to the terms of Pakistan and resolve this dispute.
So you've talked a lot about, and we've discussed a little bit about the United Nations role in all of this from the beginnings of the conflict through today. I know you've written about the concept of responsibility to protect R2P and the United Nations principles around this, when and where to intervene. Obviously, the United Nations, generally speaking, has not intervened in this part of the world, and there are other conflicts. What does that tell us about the value of the UN at this stage if it's not able or willing to intervene in cases where clear human rights abuses are taking place? Does the institution still have a place in a future?
Very important question. We have to understand that what first we have to understand that what is responsibility to protect and why it was adopted in 2005. Responsibility to protect is a new norm in international, especially in international politics, since 2005. Uh, and the international community, especially the community of states, they agreed to adopt this norm in 2005 because of the worst experience they faced in the late 1990s when they witnessed three episodes of genocide. The first, which was started in Rwanda from April to July 1994, and it witnessed that more than a million people were perished, were persecuted. Another incident which took place in 1995, that was the Bosnian genocide, and the third one was the Kosovo genocide. And in these two incidents, the UN was miserably failed to stop the genocide or the ethnic cleansing of those people. So at the Kofi Annan, he was the General Secretary of UN, he decided that we have to introduce a mechanism, a sound mechanism, which enable United Nations to intervene in such circumstances. So, as per his aspirations, the Canadian government, they also cooperated, and in 2005, UN General Assembly adopted this what now called the responsibility to protect. Responsibility to protect is built upon three fundamental pillars. The first one, it actually explains that it is the primary responsibility of a state to protect its citizens from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Why a nation state is primarily responsible? Because the state and its individuals and its subjects, they are actually signing a social contract. So under that contract, it is the responsibility of state, because some freedoms they are surrendering to the state authorities. So, like they are surrendering their security, and they are surrendering their free will to the state's authorities. This is the reason. Another thing, another pillar which is important, that is the global community support. That if a state is weak to protect its citizen, the international community needs to come forward, and it has to develop the capacity of that state. But the third and the most important pillar is that if a nation state is itself involved in a genocide, war crime, ethnic cleansing, or a crime against humanity, then it is the responsibility of international community and the United Nations to intervene and to stop such killings. And this responsibility to protect doctrine has already been invoked in the case of Libya. We know in case of Syria, in case of Yemen. So, but what most important when it comes to this Kashmir conflict, again, that this is the politics of national interest. This is the politics of power, because this United Nations is mostly dependent on the nation states for its functions. It needs support. It needs manpower. It needs financial resources, as well as it needs human resources to function. It's to function and to maintain international peace and security. But the five major powers, those are the veto powers, they are actually making matters complicated, and especially in case of Kashmir, because the India is not a veto power, but its a close partner, the United States, is a veto power. So it actually stopping the United Nations to invoke this concept of responsibility to protect. Another thing which is important, that is that no one is actually building this case to intervene in Kashmir. Pakistan is also not advocating for this concept. Even the China or the other major powers, they are not advocating. But I don't know why they are not advocating, despite the clear human rights violation in this region. Maybe there are some restive national interest for those states. So if Pakistan or the other states or those civilized states, they wants to stop genocide in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, they have to build this case and they have to persuade the US, and it's part of that. They have to show some responsibility and they have to stop India to commit such kind of crimes in this region.
So, as we look to the future, we'll start with the near future. What are some of the events, milestones that we should be monitoring as we look at developments in the region?
Well, talking about the dispute of Jammu and Kashmir, I think first thing which the international community needs to do, that is that they have to persuade India that it must stop genocide, or the international community calls the human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir. Another thing which international community, especially the US, can do, that they have to ask the Indian government that they have to restore the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, which was granted to the state under Article 370 and 35A. Another thing, India has to uplift all kinds of restrictions on the peoples of Kashmir, and as well as if international community can persuade, they can ask India that they start bilateral talks with Pakistan, and they reopen the trade routes as well as the travel routes. There are certain routes in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir as well as the in Azad Kashmir, and they have to allow the people of on both sides that they cross this the line of control, and they meet and greet their loved ones across the line of control. And as well as the international community have to understand and has to persuade this India as well as Pakistan that they sit together and they resolve this dispute as per the aspirations of peoples of Kashmir, and as per the United Nations resolution, which calls that they have to arrange the plebiscite in the region.
From your view, is there a barrier to that sort of an agreement that can be negotiated? It sounds like some of these issues are so intractable that, short of a conflict or some sort of global calamity that forces India's hand, it feels like these are going to be very difficult to get to. But in your view, is there anything that the international community can do to set the foundation for these kinds of conversations?
Yeah, I think it's not quite difficult for international community and especially for the US to push India to resume bilateral talks with Pakistan. Once it happens, I think both states, they will find a mutual framework, a way out to resolve this dispute. The first thing is to sit together to discuss the matters and to find out a way that how in a long term and in a medium term how they will move forward and how they will resolve the dispute. Another thing I think that is most important, that the international community has to put pressure on India and Pakistan, especially India. Pakistan is willing to resume talks with India and to open the trade routes and the people's routes, that India has to open these trade routes as well as this people's diplomacy across the line of control. They has to allow India has to allow that peoples from the Kashmir, occupied Kashmir, and from the Pakistani Kashmir, that they can freely move across this LOC. And I think if this happens, this will bring a fresh perspective in this dispute, and it will open the doors for the conflict resolution.
Does India state that it has a security concern that if it reaches these agreements that you've said, that somehow this will compromise their national security?
Yeah, what India is accusing Pakistan, that Pakistan is exporting terrorism in the occupied region. This concept of terrorism is very complicated, because from the Indian perspective, the people who are fighting against the occupation of Indian forces, they are terrorists. But those peoples are the indigenous peoples of Kashmir. They think that they are fighting for the liberation. Pakistan has suspended since long. Pakistan suspended the support, the armed support to the peoples of Kashmir. Pakistan is only seeking that it has to resolve this dispute through peaceful means. So these kind of security concern that Pakistan is supporting terrorism across the region is a baseless, and it India has to understand that the people who are fighting against the Indian occupation, those are not Pakistanis, but those are Kashmiris. But if India wants to stop such kind of terrorism, and it needs support for Pakistani support, I think it has to sit together with Pakistan, and it has to stop, and it has to talk and to find out a way. And I think in this sense, Pakistan will be in a position to use its influence on the peoples of Jammu and Kashmir who are fighting against the Indian occupation, that they have to stop and they have to uh, talk with the Indian authorities and to resolve the dispute.
And as you think about the prospect of conflict, the ever present danger that hangs over this, you've mentioned how many times India and Pakistan have had direct confrontations with each other, and this region has been a portion, if not the core cause of that. Is there a threat that these two nations can once again come into conflict with each other? And now, obviously, with nuclear weapons on the line, the danger level would go to an unprecedented place.
Since 1998, Pakistan is trying to contain this conflict because Pakistan understands that the nuclear weapons are mutually uh, dangerous for these two states, and Pakistan has always tried to find peaceful resolution of this dispute. But what actually is important, that since the Narendra Modi coming to power in 2014, there was an incident in 2019, if you remember, when Indian Air Force, they violated the Pakistani airspace, and Pakistan retaliated, and they captured the Indian pilot. But again, Pakistan showed its restraint and they returned that pilot. But from the Indian side, they are using the rhetorics that they will intervene in the Pakistani territory, and then they will capture the part of Azad Kashmir. So, such kind of announcements from the Indian leadership are more threatening, and they are actually the matter of concern for the Pakistan. But here comes the role of international community, that the peoples of the US and the European community, as well as the leadership of those states, that they have to put pressure on India that never ever use force to resolve this dispute. Another thing which actually has brought a new kind of picture in this region, that is the stability instability paradox. This is most important in security studies and in nuclear studies, that now the entire conflict has been transformed in this South Asian region. Now India and Pakistan, they're not fighting directly, their forces are not fighting on the border, but they has largely adopted the indirect warfare. India is using its intelligence raw to destabilize Pakistani province of Balochistan. Yeah, you understand that Pakistan is facing a new wave of terrorism, say, in the past 1.5 years, especially from the Baloch Liberation Army. And this Baloch Liberation Army and other such organizations, they are funded and trained, and even they are armed by the Indian intelligence forces. And Pakistan has already shared the clear evidence with international community as well as with the United Nations that India is involved in such activities which are actually destabilizing Pakistan. So, in a near future, Pakistan and India, they will not go for a direct war, but they will engage in indirect and in proxy war.
So, as we conclude this interview, I'd love to give our listeners a little bit of a cultural sense of the region, the people, the traditions. When times are better, what the potential of this region could be. Can you just give our listeners a sense of, what everyday life is like when there is peace?
You know, Pakistan and India, they have very close proximity. They have, you can say that they have the same culture. We understand the language of Indians. When they are speaking, we understand. When we speak Urdu, they understand, and when they speak Hindi, we understand. So this is the very commonality, that we understand the feelings and the perceptions of each other. We also share the same culture of marriage. Mostly our marriage and the Indian marriage culture is same, as well as our food is same. Most both across the borders, Pakistani community and the Indian community, they love to eat rice. They love to eat you know, the biryani and such. Like the Indian cuisine and Pakistani cuisine is the most famous in the international community, and the peoples across the globe, they love to eat Pakistani and Indian food, as well as we love to talk each other, because we have a shared history. We lived together for almost, I think, from 700 century to 19th century. So like we have, it's like 9, yeah, 1200 years shared history. And I think it's a good thing that we share such kind of sentiments, that in that our ancestors were same, and they were living next to each other. But I think this is the feeling of common peoples. But what our leadership, or the political leadership, or the military leadership, they think differently.
If people would like to learn more about this topic or about you, do you have a website, books, social media channels that you suggest people follow?
Sorry, I don't have a website, but I use my LinkedIn, Facebook, as well as people can contact me on my email address. I will be sharing it with you, and they can anytime they can reach out to me, and I would love to talk with them and to engage with them. Yeah.
Excellent. We'll put links to that in the description of this show. Doctor, thank you so much for taking so much time to talk us through this region and all of the complexities of these issues.
Thank you so much, Brian, for having me on board. Thank you.
There's only two things I want to address as we wrap this interview. Look, there are certain topics that are so personal and so cultural and so sensitive that a person not living in the region doesn't have a whole lot of perspective to add to it. And I think this is certainly one of those. So, my opinion on the matter and my thoughts on the matter, my reflections, just feel like they'd be hollow and useless given the expertise of what we just heard and the perspective that we heard versus what little I could offer as a observer from the other side of the world. But I did want to share two observations and a couple of closing thoughts. So, number one, the word genocide was invoked in today's conversation. It is hard to think of a word that evokes more passion, more emotion, more anger, fear, stirs the soul as much as that term. And many of us know what that means in practical terms. And of course, there's also the legality of it. To have a nation state, especially one the size and the power of and the centrality to global affairs as India, be accused of war crimes that amount to genocide is a very serious allegation. And I want to acknowledge the seriousness of that. And I am certainly not here to adjudicate whether that is a true statement or not. And it's for the international community and for international courts and for international governing organizations to determine. And so, for those listening who, are particularly offended by the notion of that term being used against a proud nation such as India, again, I hope that you understand what we do on this program is to simply give a platform for those who have a point of view and who represent the point of view of a portion of the global population. And so, whether or not anything that's happened in Kashmir meets that legal or effective definition is secondary to the point that there are many people in the world who believe that it has. And it's important for the listeners of this program to know that that perception and that view exists, and that it's something that has to be at least discussed and at least talked about. But we are not here to say one way or the other whether something that has occurred meets or doesn't meet that definition, or should or shouldn't have an international intervention as a result. Okay, this is not a show where we adjudicate these things. This is a show where we talk about them. And what I don't want is to have a conversation where we're not being honest and open about what feelings and emotions and thoughts are on the table. So it is important that there are those who understand that there's a portion of the global population that I think Dr. Hussain represents who absolutely believe that genocide is taking place, has taken place in this part of the world. And it's important that we know that, because you can't address the future of this issue or fully understand it without that comprehension. And I also thought it was valuable to bring this up because it's not something that's talked about in most of the global media, the English-speaking media at least. Yes, it's talked about as a conflict. Yes, it's talked about as a tragedy. Yes, it's talked about as a flashpoint in the world, but very rarely is that term ever even uttered. But just know that there's a significant portion of the global population and some academics who believe that it should be. And so it needs to be at least part of the conversation. Now, having said all of that, the perspective that I want to share, that me as the interviewer of this conversation hopes that you appreciate, is this is a conversation that wouldn't have happened not that long ago. Me being able to talk to somebody who has intimate knowledge of the daily lives of people in the conflict zone, who has lived it, researched it, grew up in it, been a part of it, it's a sign of hope that you can reach across the world and have an hour-long conversation about a difficult topic like this and share it with everybody else in the world in a way that never could have been done before. It's the magic of this format. It's the magic of the era we live in. It's the magic of the technology. And if we can keep the conversation going and we can hear different perspectives and keep talking, then there's at least a possibility that the talking leads to a resolution, leads to an enlightened conversation that leads to a peaceful future. Because if we don't understand all the perspectives, even the controversial ones, then there's always going to be embers of the fire that are left to burn even when things seem to be peaceful. And the only way to get long-term resolution is to have everybody feel like they were heard and that their issues were acknowledged, if not addressed. Hopefully, we've done a little bit to contribute to that with this conversation today. I invite you all to subscribe to this program on any of your favorite podcast platforms. We are available everywhere from iHeartRadio and Spotify to Apple Podcasts. We're available on the Odyssey app, on Libsyn, and on pretty much any Amazon Music. I always forget about Amazon Music. We are available on any of your favorite podcast platforms for the audio format. While we don't post videos of our interviews, we do have a YouTube channel that's quite popular, and we hope that you'll find us there and subscribe. You'll be the first to get new episodes when they are posted. You'll also get clips of our shows. So if you don't have time to listen to the whole thing at once or you want a preview, we do our best to get those posted pretty routinely. And you can also leave comments on my videos and engage in conversations, which we absolutely love people to do. So many ways to engage with the show, many ways to find us. Of course, we're also available on the social media sites at Brian J. Matos if you want to find me on X. The Brian J. Matos podcast is available on Facebook. We try to keep up with our Instagram account, so we do have some posts available there. And of course, if all else fails, you can always come back to my main website, brianjmatos.com. You can find all of our episodes, all of our archived programs there, as well as some of our show notes. And you can always reach out to me directly if you want to talk more and you don't want that to be in a public forum. Info at brianjmatos.com. Thank you all again for listening to this episode. And until next time, I invite you all and encourage you all to stay curious.